welcome to our webinar tonight. My name's Robin Ewing, and with Michael Anderson, I co-direct the Create Centre. We have a wonderful webinar about poetry tonight, but before we start, I'd like to acknowledge and pay our respects to our first storytellers, our First Nations Australians. I want to acknowledge that First Nations people everywhere put story and the arts at the centre of what they do, of their doing, their being, their knowing, their becoming. And we have so much to learn about how we can do that too. Tonight, we're going to talk with Bryce Youngman from Poetry in Action. Bryce is an actor, a writer, co-founder and artistic director of Poetry in Action, which is celebrating its 20th anniversary in 2026. I know that we're in for a treat. One of the things I'm particularly interested in is that we're going to talk about Poetry in Action's ambassador program, but also we're going to discuss AI and poetry and what that might look like in the future. Over to you, Bryce, and thank you so much for presenting tonight.
Oh, thank you very much, Robin, for a very lovely introduction and for reminding people of how old I am now. As we approach our 20th anniversary, and I'm no longer the spring chicken that I once was. It's lovely to be here with you all this evening to discuss things that are very near and dear to my heart, to give you a bit of an insight into Poetry in Action, how we came about, what the last 20 years has provided, and how we'll continue to operate into the future. I just want to begin by also acknowledging that I'm on Gadigal land, and that Poetry in Action, as a touring theatre provider, perform across many lands throughout Australia, and each of them have their own rich cultural heritage, often with their own unique storytelling backgrounds, which we are thrilled to be part of a continuation in our own small way. And we would also like to acknowledge the elders past and present as we commence everything here tonight. So to give you an idea of who Poetry in Action is and what we do, it often can be quite a tricky thing to explain to people, that we are a theatre company that does poetry, and often there's a lot of fusing that goes on. So to give you kind of an overview, we are about unlocking the power of words. So Poetry in Action is dedicated to transforming poetry, speeches and other heightened texts into dynamic performances that inspire, educate and connect communities. I'm going to begin by just giving, I'll give like a little bit of background on myself and on the company. We're going to look at the challenges that AI is presenting, and also kind of look, I guess, at the human connection that poetry and theatre offers in the face of AI, and ways that we can kind of work with it, some of the challenges that we might face. Then we'll be kind of having a bit of a discussion around, the future of education, the arts, creativity, and then we'll talk about our ambassadors program and that kind of thing. But to give you a bit of a sense of who we are, what we do, and the breadth of Poetry in Action, we're just going to begin with a quick little video which outlines who we are, what we do, and how, as a company, we are trying to encourage young people to have a voice, and indeed everybody who works with Poetry in Action to find how they can continue to have a voice in what is a very noisy world.
I am so proud of Poetry in Action and what we've been able to achieve.
The first thing you need to know about poetry is that it is everywhere. It's in books, movies, video games, advertisements, even the world around you.
You shall be one flesh, one heart, one soul.
The nature of theatre is such that it fosters the development of collaboration, communication, creativity, and critical thinking.
That perception sometimes too that poetry is drab and boring and old-fashioned, and it gives them idea that poetry is exciting and it can be fun and exuberant.
What you did today was amazing.
engaged the whole time.
You show them that poetry is still relevant. The way that you sort of dramatically present the poems allows the students to get that understanding.
Strict lockdown laws are in place.
And one of punishing proportion. Schools will be closed.
I can't believe the news today. I can close my eyes and make it go away.
The world we live in today has been shaped by words.
2, 3, 4. How do you dance when our earth is turning? Yeah. How do you sleep while our beds are burning?
What will you say?
When it's your time to speak.
I remember everything being so engaging to the point where, like, someone who never thought they could see themselves being poetic, someone who's like is so far away from that can feel like they can pursue that. That's like thousands of kids that might never have the confidence to pursue poetry or even get a glimpse into that world of the arts, of expressing yourself. And I hope you guys get to reach out to these kids, get to talk about things that matter and, you know, give kids confidence to pursue this.
Absolutely vital, absolutely important to make poetry exciting for our kids.
Thank you very much for watching. So yes, that gives an overview into poetry in action, and I guess the kind of the breadth of Australia that we cover. Indeed, we're now in 4 different countries: Australia, New Zealand, Hong Kong, and the UAE. And we, in our 20th year, are approaching. We think we've got to crunch some numbers still, but we're approaching our 1 millionth audience member, which means that effectively 1 in 28 people in Australia have seen a poetry in action show, which for a small company, with very limited resources, is an extraordinary achievement, and one that I'm very, very proud of. I'm very proud with the team that we lead. I'm very fortunate to be supported by a team of 3 incredible women who are amazing advocates for the arts and creativity. And I'll be introducing one of those people to you in a few minutes. Just give you a little bit of background now on myself as a person growing up in Western Sydney. I grew up in Penrith. I obviously had the experience, I guess, growing up in the 80s and the 90s of Penrith, Emu Plains not being the cultural centre of the city, and for somebody who was in a very run town, having something of an affinity for the arts, for acting, for poetry, felt like a bit of a lonely experience. And my experience in learning poetry was that even though I was drawn to it, I struggled to see how it was relevant to me. I thought that the words were beautiful, but I didn't have, I don't think, teachers that were able to kind of crack it open for me in the way that would have made a real difference. And so, interestingly, when I was 18, I got into drama school at WAPA, the Western Australian Academy of Performing Arts. And it wasn't something that I was expecting, but poetry was actually held in a very, very high esteem there, particularly by a critical voice teacher named Jenny West. And Jenny instilled in all the actors that went through there the absolute critical necessity of actors to be able to speak poetry well. Not just as a skill set for actors, but also just in terms of being able to focus your attention on a very short piece and move an audience with it. That not every time that as an actor that you need to kind of use your skills are you going to have the benefit of a play or even a scene. Sometimes you might be in an audition and you have to kind of wow somebody and they just go, show me something, you've got 1 minute. And being able to have access to poetry and to be able to perform a poem was seen as a real critical skill, to be able to move an audience, to be able to be specific with language, to be able to elevate something which people might not encounter every day, and to kind of make your way forward with it as an artist. It seemed as absolutely critical. And so it was really there, watching a performance of some of the senior students when I first started, that I watched some actors who came across as incredibly Australian guys and girls who suddenly break open this most extraordinary poetry that I had actually come in contact at school and I'd never really understood, suddenly brought to vivid life in front of me. And I kind of sat there as a young audience member, only a year out of school myself, going, oh, that's what it means. Like wow, like that's, and I guess having the poem brought to life through performance was just a revelation for me. It made me want to do it. It made me want to get better at it. And it also made me think that if I'd had an opportunity to have that as a kid in Penrith, then I would have probably done a lot better in my exams, because I would have been able to access something. I think quite often the historical approach to teaching poetry has always been around it as a literary pursuit. And through the experience of watching it and seeing it performed, it reminds me that actually poetry in its history was first and foremost spoken word and came before the written text. And it was only through the evolution of writing that we wrote down poems that had already been spoken and shared. And so I guess a connection to that history is really important to Poetry in Action as a company, and to how we approach our role in making poetry relevant and fun to our audience. I guess in terms of the challenges that we're facing with things like AI, social media, and things like that, in terms of the noise that we talked about before, the noisy world for a young person, the opportunity to kind of study poetry or to have it as something of a counterpoint or an antidote to the world that they have is really important. I think because poetry, particularly the performance and sharing of it, is a deeply human connection, and I think that the advent of AI and the capacity to access huge streams of text without necessarily having it connected to a human or having human connection at its heart is a real challenge for education and for kids and for us as a company as well. How we stay relevant in a world where suddenly the capacity to access creative text through AI is huge. And so I guess the challenge that we're facing is that we're living in a very loud moment in history. We've got young people who may be quiet, but I don't really think that they're silent. And what I feel like has been happening is that young people particularly, and this is the feedback we've gotten through our work, is that they're just overwhelmed with content, and they swim in this constant flood of opinion, outrage, performance, branding, algorithm bait. There's all these sorts of things calling on their attention, and it can have a real impact on their capacity to discern information, to discern their own feelings on a subject, because everything is urgent and everything is asking for attention. And in that environment, many young people, I think, come to view themselves really as consumers, first and foremost, that they're there to consume whatever the algorithm delivers. And if they do consider themselves as makers, it's more, I guess, it's evolved into a kind of a more narrow influencer kind of context around how to have, polished, public-facing, edited, optimized for likes presentations, as opposed to really exploring things that might involve failure, that might involve risk, that might involve making them uncomfortable, making themselves potentially a point of ridicule. And that's become something that I think young people have avoided now more than ever before. And so what could be perceived as a lack of voice, I think, is in my opinion, is a lack of space. It's a lack of space for kids to think slowly, and a space to sit with uncertainty, and space to kind of speak without being judged or ranked. And I guess that's where poetry matters, because not only as an academic exercise, but as a counter to that technology, that poetry, I think, gives kids an opportunity to slow the world down. It resists the algorithm because it actually rewards attention. It rewards kids getting involved with it and not having to scroll past it. And it's not a distraction, it's kind of an event in itself. It invites young people to kind of view language in a way that allows them to own it and challenge their perceptions of what it can do. In poetry, there is absolutely no requirement to be marketable or to go viral. It's only a requirement that you be honest about how something makes you feel or about your own feelings, and whether that's intellectual, emotional, or imaginative. So poetry, I think, reframes young people not only as potential creators, but as meaning makers, as interpreters of work. And I think that are some really critical skills for young people, taking them into a world which is filled with AI. It gives them permission to say, like, this is what I notice, this is what I feel, this is what confuses or angers me, this is what delights me, and without necessarily thinking about turning those thoughts into a brand, for want of a better word. So in a world that trains I guess, young people, or is training them to scroll. I think that poetry teaches them to stop. And in a world that encourages imitation, I think that poetry offers an opportunity for kids to be unique and to have a unique voice. And I guess in a world that is increasingly monetizing our attention, poetry restores a possibility, a capacity to have intimacy of thought. And poetry doesn't try to compete with noise. I feel like it creates a space where a clearing space where you can kind of sit inside it. And so what we're going to do is have a bit of a look at a piece of poetry and our approach to it. And we're going to look at how kids might first encounter poetry and why there might be some resistance to it, and then ways that at Poetry in Action we break that down. It's probably worth noting for those of you who might not be familiar with our work that we have 2 teams of 3 actors that travel all around Australia, New Zealand, Hong Kong and the UAE, and that those 2 teams of 3 actors, the 6 actors in total, will actually keep 4 shows in repertory, which have huge amounts of different texts. We look at speeches, we look at rhetoric, we look at a whole range of different things about how language can be powerful and how kids can access it in a way that is fun, safe, engaging, and ultimately relevant. So I'd like to begin by having a look at a poem that I think a lot of kids would struggle with on a first reading. And to do that, we're going to have to bring in some help. So I would like to welcome to the stage our phenomenal, fabulous Olivia Hall-Smith, who is currently working with us as a producer, but will also be directing her first show with Poetry in Action this year. But I don't want to steal any of her thunder, so I'll let Liv give you a bit of background on who she is and how she came to work with Poetry in Action.
Thanks, Bryce. Hello, everyone, and thank you again for joining us. My name's Olivia. As Bryce said, I currently work as the producer for Poetry in Action. I was originally an actor on tour and have seen firsthand how poetry influences young people and the way that Poetry in Action brings it to them in the form of narrative and comedy and all of that, it's exciting having that first-hand experience. For me, I grew up in Brisbane and I had a pretty similar experience to Bryce when it came to learning poetry in school. I was a voracious reader, I loved language, but when it came to poetry, there was always a bit of a wall up for me. I found it somewhat inaccessible. I didn't feel connected to it. I didn't feel my learning was connected to it. And especially in a peer group, sitting in a high school group of, friends and peers who weren't interested and didn't think that poetry was cool, it made it feel even more inaccessible to, even if it's something that I was sort of interested in, the fact that the peer group around me was so disengaged from it immediately made that wall 10 times higher. And it wasn't till towards the end of my sort of high schooling career where I was doing drama classes and really interested in performance and, speaking text aloud, that I started looking at poetry in a different way through that lens, through the lens of performance and, the spoken word as opposed to just the written word. And as soon as I made that shift and started looking at it through that lens, it was like night and day in terms of my approach and my understanding of poetry and poetic forms. Immediately I could sense what, these words were trying to get across to me. If I was saying them out loud, embodying them, it was like this instant connection between, what was on the page and what was actually happening inside myself. And it just opened so many doors in terms of self-awareness and self-expression. When I was in year 12, I ended up entering the Australian Poetry Slam, where I ended up winning the Queensland final and making it to the top 5 in the national finals. And after that, spent a few years in Brisbane performing in poetry slams, performing at the Woodford Folk Festival, going to drama school down here in Sydney, where incidentally I had the same voice teacher as Bryce Youngman, Jenny West. She is amazing. And so it was just a natural progression really for me to then come to Poetry in Action and continue my passion for, the spoken word and spoken poetry, and sharing that with young people across the country.
So I guess we are very lucky to have phenomenal people available to us, but also I think it's worthwhile reminding ourselves of what it must be for a young person to have access wherever they are in Australia to kind of people of the level that we enjoy with Liv, like having the experience of both being a performance poet as well as an actor who can then break apart, very complex pieces of text and make them accessible. The key thing for us really, I believe, is relevance. Because the things that I've found in my experience over the last 20 years is that kids will first be like, why does it matter? Why is this? How is this going to help my life? How does this help me? And so I feel like we are often a bridge between the work that is set for study and needs to be done and discovering that relevance for a youth audience. So we're just going to kick off and try to give you guys a bit of an experience about what it might be for a child or for a student to encounter a piece of kind of heightened text that they might not find an immediate connection with, and how we break that down as actors and artists, and then try to dig out that relevance for the audience. So I'm just going to bring up a poem now, which we're going to read, and then we'll break it down and discuss it a little bit further. We're just going to kick in and read this much in the same way that a student might on a first read. So this is, an approach to a poem on a very first look at, and we'll just get a sense. Liv's going to give us her best impression of somebody reading this for the first time in a classroom.
Give me more love or more disdain, the torrid or the frozen zone bring equal ease unto my pain. The temperate affords me none. Either extreme of love or hate is sweeter than a calm estate. Give me a storm, if it be love, like Danae in that golden shower, I swim in pleasure. If it prove disdain, that torrent will devour my vulture hopes, and he's possessed of heaven that's but from hell released. Then crown my joys or cure my pain, give me more love or more disdain.
Great. So that gives you a sense of how overwhelming the language could be to somebody who's, because we haven't given it any kind of specificity. There's no context around it. There's no kind of performance being noted in it. And so what I think will be really helpful for you guys is to kind of see the process that we go through as actors. So to begin with, context matters. So within our shows, we wouldn't just do a poem, obviously, like that without creating a bit of context around it. Who's the writer? When was it written? Why does it matter? What's trying to be get across? So, Liz, do you want to give us a bit of background on who the writer is?
So this particular poem, Mediocrity in Love Rejected, was written by an English Cavalier poet named Thomas Carew, who lived around the sort of late 16th, early 17th century. His work is sort of very classic of the time. He was a key figure of English Cavalier poetry, and his work very much is full of those aristocratic values, so wit and elegance, and written with this sort of very smooth and polished tone. And in this poem, the word mediocrity in the title is what he's fighting against, really, in the context of love. But mediocrity isn't sort of the same way that we would interpret it today. We're not looking at mediocrity in terms of dullness or commonness. He's really talking about mediocrity as moderation and fighting against the idea of moderation in love. He doesn't want the commonplace. He doesn't want lukewarm affection. What he wants is, those big extreme emotions of love or hate. Go big or go home, really. That's,
which I think, so once we get to that, and we'll start to unpack this a little bit more, but I think go big and go home is actually something that a lot of teenagers can relate to. The idea of wanting to feel something passionately. If you love me, love me. If you hate me, but just put some effort into it. And I think that finding those pathways in for a youth audience is how we develop relevance. So our first step as artists is to obviously create some context. So that would be through our own research, and then obviously that would be imparted within the scripts themselves. And then just to give you a sense of how we actually start to break the poem down technically, we go from the kind of the plain text here into breaking it down into both the rhythm and into looking at the rhyme scheme. So the rhythm that we've got here is iambic, which as you probably all know, just means that it has a weak, strong stress. And then what we kind of help kids understand is that allows the more important words to rise to the surface. The most important word generally being then the rhyming word, which is at the end of the line. A lot of kids when they approach a poem will think it has to rhyme, and so it's kind of good to help them understand that the rhyming words can be the most important, but it also might be just a guide a guide, and none of the stuff that we kind of try to impart to them is that there's no hard rules, there's guides, and that influences the way that we perform as well. So we can see here that we've got a relatively unusual structure. It is a sonnet, so it's written in 14 lines. The first thing that the actors will do is they'll break down the rhyme scheme. So we've got A, B, then a rhyming couplet of C, C, and then we go back to alternating lines of D, E, then another couplet, and then a final rhyming couplet at the end. It's worthwhile pointing out, of course, that the words zone and none don't rhyme today, but at the time of writing, they were probably pronounced like zun and none, or something similar to that. Similar to love and prove, or probably love and prove. And so we kind of help kids understand the way that English language evolves over time. And so whilst it might not sound like a direct rhyme to us now, that's certainly the way it was when it was originally done. So just with a bit of an eye now just on meter, Liv's going to have another read through of the poem and just see how it affects your ear when we just do a very, very basic thing of just really hitting that meter.
Give me more love or more disdain, the torrid or the frozen zone. Bring equal ease unto my pain. The temperate affords me none. Either extreme of love or hate is sweeter than a calm estate. Give me a storm if it be love, like Danae in that golden shower. I swim in pleasure if it prove, disdain that torrent will devour. My vulture hopes and he's possessed of heaven that's but from hell released. Then crown my joys or cure my pain. Give me more love or more disdain.
Thank you. So hopefully that's kind of made a few images a bit more clearer. Now, of course, another thing we have to do is create some context. We've got some things in there that kids might not be aware of. We've got a reference to classical myths. So I'll probably let you talk a little bit about
Yeah, so in the poem, the reference to Danae in that golden shower is referencing a Greek myth. So Danae was a mortal woman. Zeus came to her, the god Zeus, in the form of a literal golden shower, golden rain that fell down into her lap, ultimately impregnating her, and she ends up giving birth to Perseus, who is an amazing, monster slayer. But what he's sort of using within that metaphor is the idea of, imagine being a mortal and having a god come to you and rain down on you in this, ultimate form of love.
It's one of, and I think it's one of those things too, that when we start to unpack things like that and we create links for kids that allows them to feel like they're in a bit of a secret, that's actually a real way to kind of help them get excited about the depth that can be contained in a poem. The idea that in 14 lines we've already got this link back to these ancient stories that can continue to inspire and help them think about deeper ways of expressing themselves. We've also got other things like it's a slightly odd phrase, vulture hopes, and things like that, where we would break things down like that and help kids understand. I mean, how would you describe it?
Yeah, I mean, vulture hopes, what it is, a vulture is, those ominous birds that you see swirling around carcasses, and the only way that they can feed is on, the meat of dead things. So for Thomas Carew in this, it's sort of like his hopes are this poor, bony creature that's just holding out for any little pickings of what might be love,
It's I'm just going to bring the poem back up again so you can see it. It's worth pointing out too, there's a couple of things that often get missed in the study of poetry because they do relate more to the performance of poetry rather than the literary understanding of it. So one of them is enjambment, which if those of you who haven't kind of come across that before, it just means that we've got lines here like around shower, prove and devour, that don't have any punctuation at the end. And I mean, I know that certainly my experience at school was that we read through lines and every student stopped at the end of the line. They pretended that there was a full stop at the end of every line, and helping them understand that the sense can roll through and that poems begin to breathe and have a life of their own once we get out of the habit of going, give me a storm if it be love, like Danae in that golden shower, I swim in pleasure if it proved, like, and actually helping them understand that things like an enjambment is a key. It's a tool for actors to make sure that we kind of swing from one word to the next. So often when we do a poem that has an enjambment, you'll see that they hold on to that word a little bit longer and stretch it out. The other big thing is that we, as actors, we look at vowels and consonants, and we make sure that we really pay attention to our diction. It's often said in acting that vowels contain the emotion and that consonants contain the meaning. So often actors will do a piece of text and they will do something where they take out all the consonants, and they will just go through and just speak the vowels just to hear how that sounds and all the emotion that kind of rides inside the words. And then likewise, when it comes to the consonants, they'll take the vowels out and try to really get their teeth in and their muscularity around the ends of the words, because that's where we kind of have specificity of meaning. So with all of that in mind, we're now kind of going to give you a reading that might be contained within one of our shows, where we start to look at a combination of Liv embodying the human qualities of the poem, looking at the punctuation that we've talked about, and kind of acknowledging the enjambments, and then the emotion within the vowels as well. And so, would you like to do this with the poem, up or with the poem?
I think for the sake of
Yeah.
viewers, we can take it down and I can reference.
So, just looking at the all the kind of the elements that we've built into it now. So we're looking at the rhyme, the rhythm, the structure, the enjambments, and then giving it that human connection that the kids often wouldn't get on the page.
Give me more love or more disdain. The torrid or the frozen zone bring equal ease unto my pain. The temperate affords me none. Either extreme of love or hate is sweeter than a calm estate. Give me a storm, if it be love, like Danae in that golden shower, I swim in pleasure. If it prove disdain, that torrent will devour my vulture hopes, and he's possessed of heaven that's but from hell released. Then crown my joys, or cure my pain. Give me more love or more disdain.
Thank you very, very much. In the poetry world, we do this, so yeah. So I think that gives you an idea about how we can take a poem that doesn't necessarily have any direct relevance to a youth audience, and then by kind of approaching it as actors, as artists, with, you know, obviously the incredible skills that we are fortunate enough to have within the company, we then can kind of give kids a chance to see how there is so much contained within such a small amount of poetry. And I think, just to kind of your point too previously about, I think what it does too, and I'd be interested in just hearing from you about your experience on tour, because you did how many shows?
Over 200.
Right, so we did. So typically in any given year, we'll perform to up to about 70,000 kids. That's what we're kind of doing at the moment. And so hundreds and hundreds of shows will get performed. I think last year we did 520 shows, and so each team will do, you know, several hundred shows. So just, I think one thing that I'd be interested in talking about is just your point about the peer group, because I think kids feeling like it's okay to like something, being given permission to kind of go, oh, that's cool, I like that. I might not have liked poetry in the classroom, but that I like that show, I like that actor. That gives them an in. That gives them a permission, I think, to kind of, you know, to the peer group. So, I mean, from being on tour, what was your kind of experience of?
Yeah, I mean, breaking the poem down like Bryce and I just have, that happens through our shows in narratives that are often wacky and funny and have characters that wear silly costumes and have internal rivalries, and within a whole narrative that kids can follow. And then, for example, we do one show called Words of War, which is about Wilfred Owen and his World War I poetry. And there's a scene in the show where a character is approaching his poem Futility, which is about one of his friends, a soldier, freezing to death in the night in the snow during the war. And this character comes at it for the first time thinking it's like, you know, Call of Duty, it's a video game, war is exciting and it's fun, and it's like, oh, this is a really cool scenario, and starts bouncing into this poem in completely the wrong reading. And throughout the next 5 or 10 minutes in the scene with the character, the poem gets broken down quite similarly to the way that Bryce and I just broke down that poem. But being able for the children to see it and for young people to see it through the narrative and through young people like them in front of them, you know, exploring big emotions and exploring these sort of technical ideas, but then embodying them and understanding how then it changes the meaning. Performing that show, sometimes students would come in at the start, you can tell they don't want a bar of it, they've heard it's a show about poetry, they're not excited, they drag their feet, 200 year sevens sitting in a school gymnasium at 9 a.m. They're not into it. They don't, you know, they're not going to have a good time. And then you sort of start seeing kids sit up and listen and realize that, oh, it's not just someone standing there going, listen to this sonnet. It's someone really trying to connect with them, to encourage ideas, to communicate ideas, and to really treat them with respect and treat them as equals. And trust that they're going to be able to understand these sometimes complicated techniques. And by the end of the show, I mean, I did shows where at the end, a school group that you just thought was absolutely not gonna give you the time of day, suddenly at the end there's kids that come up to you and say, oh my God, I didn't realize that poetry could be like that. Oh, I've been looking at this poem in class and now I think I understand what they're saying. I'm gonna go and write some poetry. Can I have your autograph? And you know, it sounds like a almost too good to be true story, but there are schools where that happens, and it happens every year. It happens for every team, and it's really moving and it's really touching to see this sort of immediate change in young people. Once you start to sort of bring them these ideas in a way that isn't just sitting in a classroom reading it on the page, it's embodied, it's exciting, it's funny, and ultimately it's inviting them in to join us on the journey to understand meaning, to understand emotion, to understand themselves and, you know, these big feelings that all of us do feel in the world through the techniques of poetry and language.
It's I mean, it's one of those things that kind of, you know, I find continuously inspiring about the work that we do. I mean, it's probably worth noting too that we do have opportunities for kids to engage after the show, so that once they do see the show, we actually run a poetry competition. So kids have an opportunity to enter their poetry into the competition. There's cash prizes for the kids for the top 3 poems. There's also the chance to have their work included in a show, so that then gets performed. Their work gets performed to tens of thousands of kids the following year, often alongside, you know, they have their poem alongside something like from Maya Angelou or whomever, but they've got this opportunity to have their poem elevated and taken seriously, and that's and we've been blown away by some of that. I mean, one of the you actually saw at the beginning on the video, one of the artists who won the poetry competition about 10 years ago has gone on to have this really, you know, phenomenal career. He kind of got discovered on Triple J Unearthed, and he's been, you know, creating some extraordinary music. And he and I caught up a while ago, and he was like, you were the first guys to take me seriously, that actually made me feel like that what I was writing wasn't just something silly that because I was a teenager and going through something,
that
it was,
his voice mattered.
Yeah, and it was, you know, it's I guess it's worth pointing out that opportunity for him spurred him on to do, you know, to create a career out of it. In fact, we'll put a link. We've got a little bit more info on him, and we'll put a link in the chat for a video around him. His name's Marley Jose, and you should look him up because he really is he's really an amazing young artist and a great example of what the outcomes can be of us inspiring people. So we also have, I guess, you know, the opportunity for kids to, you know, to write this poetry, but I guess to move into the next kind of little segment, the counterpoint to that is something that we've encountered in the last few years is that we've received a lot of AI poetry, a lot. It's something that we never kind of anticipated, obviously, when we started the company 20 years ago, and then suddenly we found ourselves getting poetry in that looked very similar and was very structured, but ultimately lacking. And one of the things that we had to do was kind of sift through this enormous mound of poetry, keeping in mind that there is a cash prize, and our reputation's on the line, and there's real world kind of ramifications should we not be able to identify it. But then once we kind of and we get hundreds and hundreds of applications or poems submitted a year, so it takes a lot of resources for a small company to kind of sift through that and find out exactly what is AI and what's not. I guess it kind of brings me into the challenges and the opportunities that AI presents, and why we've got, as a company that kind of advocates for poetry and advocates for something that's the kind of a very ancient kind of art form. How in a modern world that sits along AI. So I'd like to kind of have a bit of a chat with Robin, if that's okay. For those of you who aren't aware, obviously Robin has an incredible background in looking at the purpose of creativity and how creativity in education is so critical to developing lifelong skills, not just for the sake of creativity itself, as might have been experienced in some of the bygone eras of education, where it was seen as a nice thing to have, but nothing too critical. I think Robin is one of those voices who's been advocating for creativity to be a critical part of education. So I just wanted to kind of chat with you, Robin, as somebody who's an expert in your field, and have a bit of a chat around the challenges that AI is presenting to both to creativity, but education as well. Like, from your perspective, like how is it possible for AI to change young people's relationship with language? I guess not only how they write, but how they think, given it's possible to type in some prompts and get screeds of text back. What do you think is the impact on that and a young child who's trying to be learning to express themselves?
Well, first let me say, Bryce, that I'm certainly not an expert on AI, but I actually thought your choice of poem was really interesting from the perspective of thinking about all of this, because for me, if we become over-reliant, and if young people become over-reliant on being able to depend on content that is created fairly generically and also created on past text and content, we are going to lose a lot. And so the poem about mediocrity, not wanting mediocrity, I guess. Because for me, poetry allows us to really focus on our emotion. I always go to poetry at critical times in my life, to help me think about what I'm going through, etc. And I guess I worry, and this would be a good question, I guess, for you to put to everyone tonight, in a sense, because others might have a different perspective. But I worry that it may cause us to lose our creativity with language, because language is a resource for meaning, and it's always developing and changing. And we all express ourselves because we're unique in our own ways. And it worries me that if we start to rely too much, on, as you say, this huge amount of already constructed text, we're very much in trouble, because we know that our imagination, our ability to solve problems and come up with something new, all of those things are really important if we're going to survive in what's happening in the complexity of the world we're living in at the moment.
I think you're right, and I think as well, I guess the critical thinking skills that come alongside it, and understanding of language is critically important. There's some stuff that we've referenced in some of our shows before around George Orwell's essays on the politics of language, which is really interesting, because he talks about how language can be used by governments to to misinform or disinform the populace. And in a world that is increasingly filled with misinformation or disinformation, then I think that the ability to understand language and be able to use it to think critically is going to become a skill that's even more critical than it might have been in years gone by, because we have this deluge of information available, and indeed a deluge of text available. I think it's really interesting what you said about AI being, I mean, AI looks in the past because it's drawing from things that have already existed. So its capacity to create something new is only on what it's been fed. So it lacks that human spirit, that human connection, which is, I think, as you saw probably from the performance of Liv, it is that human presence that brings that language to life. I mean, do you think, Robin, as well, that that there's like a risk, just in terms of not only, I guess, critical thinking, but is there a risk that AI could affect the literacy, like, of kids? Like, you know, I mean, I remember that the first thing that people were worried about was autocorrect when it first came out, that it was going to destroy people's capacity to spell and express themselves. But do you think there's a risk that something like AI could have a genuine impact on literacy, because it becomes easier to have these swathes of generated text, or things that only have surface level meaning and not the deeper meaning that we're talking about with poetry?
It's how you define literacy, doesn't it? But for me, it does involve critical literacy. It does involve critical thinking. It does involve being able to infer and look below the surface of text to deep meaning. And it's interesting because, you know, we've sort of faced this too in a different way with plagiarism in academia.
Right. Mm-hmm.
It leads to a missing out of being able to grapple with meaning in your own way. And so I think there is that worry. I mean, we're already facing a literacy crisis, an adult literacy crisis in this country, you know, where 44% of Australians over 40 already have considerable trouble with literacy. So to me, that, you know, over dependence, over reliance, and not using AI appropriately could have a whole lot of damaging effects, not least becoming deeply literate and being able to continue to take on the literacy challenges, because there are so many more forms of literacy now than there was when I went to school.
Yeah, and I think it's worthwhile pointing out that in dystopian novels like 1984, there is, like, one of the first things that they attack is language. You know, because if there's no word for revolution, how can you have a revolution? You know, and the idea of destroying, that there's that whole track within the novel about just destroying language, and how that's used to kind of, in the context of that novel, enslave people. And I think it's really interesting because we are advocates for it, and it can sound like we're ringing alarm bells. I just think that it behooves us to remember that the skills that we're talking about could easily be lost. You know, and that it's not kind of catastrophizing to say that in, you know, if we look back several generations, that literacy has been declining, and with more capacity for AI to do the work for people, it kind of creates an opportunity for us to get lazier. But I guess on the flip side of it, do you see anything positive about AI and what it can do for? I mean, given that it's here and it's not going anywhere, is there something, rather than kind of wrapping ourselves up in a ball and rocking back and forth, is there any kind of benefits that we can see for creativity or for youth?
Well, they say it's great for repetitive tasks, you know, but, you know, I did hear an author recently talk about how they fed their own work in the chat. And, you know, that was interesting in terms of looking at, you know, what came back.
Yeah.
So I'm sure there are really appropriate ways to use AI, and But we are told that AI will get better and better and will be able to do all of those things we're talking about what humans can do. So, that scares me a little.
Yeah, well, I did see somebody. Yeah, I did see somebody comment who said, "I don't want AI to write my poetry. I want an AI to do, I want AI to do the dishes so that I can write poetry." Like it's that. I guess it's the next hope for the next kind of evolution is finding a way to have it service some things for us without taking away the creative control that we really want. I've got a provocative question that I just want to put out for people that we can discuss at the end of this. I just want to talk a little bit about our ambassadors program before we kind of kick over to some questions. But I just wanted for people to have a think about, given that AI is here and it is posing this challenge. What if we don't get it right, and if we don't kind of crack the right way to prevent the things that Rob and I have just been talking about? What do we think is the outcome, like in a generation? Like, what do we think the worst thing could be, or what do we do, even if not the worst thing? What do we think the potential outcomes are for not cracking this AI moment for kids, and what it might mean for the future? I guess one of the things that I just wanted to kind of wrap up on was just to give people a bit of an idea about something that's kind of important to us at Poetry in Action. It is providing platforms. We've talked about platforming kids and emerging artists, but we have a new program this year in our 20th year, which has been spearheaded by one of our board members, Harriet Pratton, and by the lovely Dee, who is joining us here this evening as well. And it is our ambassadors program. And the Poetry in Action Ambassadors program is aimed specifically at finding 3 representatives of the poetry community who are mid-career poets. As we've now entered our 20th year, we're keen to find ways of working with people who have already established themselves in their career, stretching ourselves as a company a little bit further away from looking at emerging artists, keeping in mind that there's people who might have seen us perform who are now, in their 20s and 30s, and ways that we can provide a platform to them to work with us as a company to help elevate both their own work and I think it's worth pointing out that at the moment, Poetry in Action is the only national provider of Australian writing to kids. Like, there is no other company that provides Australian writing to kids in schools. And so we consider ourselves having a very vital position in platforming artists that are writing now from an Australian perspective. Of course, we have the great benefit of being able to look at poetry from across many cultures, and we do that indeed, and do it with our speeches as well, looking at great speeches that have changed the world and teaching kids about rhetoric. But this is a program which Robin is helping us with as well, in terms of trying to create a community of people who are seeking maybe an audience. We perform to 70,000 kids a year, so seeking an audience for their own work to be included in some of our works, but also then helping us elevate the discussion around poetry in general. And so there'll be a bunch of things that we're going to do this year in our 20th year that we are seeking poets to apply. So if you do know any poets who have, it doesn't matter what kind of discipline they come from, if they've been a performance poet like Liv, or if they've been somebody who's maybe had a book of poetry published, but they've already got some runs on the board and they're keen to kind of engage with us. We'd love to hear from people. We've got applications open at the moment. They do close next week, and then we'll be going through and looking at the best possible candidates to kind of help represent Poetry in Action in our 20th anniversary year. There's also just a QR code there if you wanted to kind of have a bit of a look at anything further. I think that's about it from us. I know that there might be some questions or some kind of other thoughts on the question that I posed to you. So I'm happy to open the floor now and just say a massive thank you for the opportunity to present here with you this evening, to give you a bit of an insight into the work of theatre somehow through Zoom, but into the I guess the real impact that human connection through poetry can have in this busy, noisy world and the advent of AI. It's an incredible time to be, a purveyor of theatre and poetry, some pretty old art forms in an era where there is so much rapid change in the world. So I just want to invite Liv back in case there's any questions about Liv or her experience with us, or performance in general, and throw open to any questions that people might have.
Hey team, hey Poetry in Action. Hi Bryce, thanks for that. Was really good. I do have that was a good provocation question. I think, I work with schools, as you know, as an ELD education leader, and we just had this discussion this morning with Year 11 ELD English, and I think what I sort of made them think about is not to be scared of AI, because it is here, and we have to accept it, can't ignore it. But I think the real risk is not AI. I think for us, it's really how we respond to it. Like, how do educators, schools, institutions, the general public, like people like yourselves, organizations, how do we address that? And because we have to teach kids now how to be more, I guess, discerning. How do you develop discernment in students? That's something that we've not really focused on before. Also, that whole idea of access, we were thinking the kids that have access to this, the AI, the technology, what does this mean for the kids that do not have that access? So we have that question as well. And and then we came down to one conclusion, and I hope this answers your question. I think if we keep on teaching for purpose and intention, I think we're in good hands. Like, if we could just keep driving purpose and intention with our learners, that Robin mentioned, being able to infer. NAPLAN, let's talk NAPLAN HSC, that's where the kids go. They cannot infer. Because have we taught them explicitly that inferring is using your own experiences? So for poetry, we've always said it cannot be as deeply felt as your writing, because the AI would not have your experiences, your perspective, how it smelt to you, how it felt for you in that moment. And I'm like Robin, I write poetry myself. I'm encouraging teachers to do that, and it does happen during different periods of my life. So I think, again, purpose, intention, I think we're hopefully AI will always be there, but you're right. We would hate to think that our kids, if we're already facing it, they've already answered the assessment notification and said, this is what I'm handing in. Fed the AI with the success criteria, whatever else, but you can tell, it's not. Anyway, that's my answer to your.
Thank you, Susan. I think that's great. The idea of we touched on at the beginning, the idea of poetry being able to aid kids in discerning, because it does require focus, and I think sometimes we can get caught in this concept of what does this poem mean? What was this poem mean? And I think that an equally crucial point is, how does it make you feel? And that I feel is a real critical difference, because your feeling will be different to someone else. And I think that Liv's point about futility as well, approaching it with your own worldview and then being challenged for that is a real point of being able to kind of interpret and reinterpret text. I had an experience with ChatGPT a while ago when it first came out, and I was trying to see what it could do, and I asked if it knew about Shakespeare's lost play, the history of Cardenio, and it said yes, and it understood that it was lost, that it was based on a kind of story of Don Quixote, and then he said, and then I said, can you create what you think might have been the first act? And it did. At pace. I mean, it was terrible. It was almost unreadable, but it was quick. And I can imagine that if that was set for a student assignment to kind of imagine what the first scene might have been in this lost Shakespeare play. I mean, that'd be a tough assignment. But I can imagine feeling threatened by something that can create at that kind of pace, and kind of going, where do I sit in this? How does my creativity matter?
Yeah, I mean, I think you're completely right, Cindy, in that it you know, at a time now where the tool is literally at their fingertips to tell them what the right grammar is, to like fix the grammar for them, it's really about fostering that confidence in their own sense of self-expression. Because if they care about it, then they will use those techniques and use everything that they're taught and the engagement that hopefully they'll have in the classroom for something, for their own pursuit, because they care about it. Mm-hmm. So yeah, fostering that sense of your voice matters, your creativity matters, your opinion matters. The techniques are important, but if ChatGPT or, you know, Gemini or whatever can give them to you straight away, the thing that we should be instilling in them is the confidence to do the work because of who they are and what they think and what they feel.
Sure.
I can tell just from your amazing little video, and thank you so much for showing us some of the technical work you do. I really appreciated getting to that little window into your process there, and I suppose maybe you are going to be the true ambassadors for process over product. This might be, you know, the thing you can do that other people aren't doing. But what I'd like to ask you is about use of English, because obviously you're working in lots of Indigenous communities, you're working in places that have a real mix of first languages. Mm-hmm. Have you been working with any integration of language or integration of original languages from students who are using English as a second language or dialect? And
yeah, like we had a long running program which was unfortunately disrupted by COVID in a First Nations community in Kings Canyon. It was a very kind of ongoing long term collaboration where the challenge faced by this incredibly remote school in a place called Wataka, which if you're not sure where Wataka is, if you kind of threw a dart at the middle of a map of Australia, it's pretty much right in the centre. And the challenge faced by this incredibly remote school with one teacher, a kind of teacher principal, was having kids engaged with language and with their studies. And so we kind of partnered with some other organisations to hold a kind of a festival once a year where we would have a sports and storytelling festival, and Poetry in Action represented kind of the storytelling component. But obviously going into First Nations community as, you know, non-Indigenous artists and going, hey, let's tell you about storytelling to the oldest storytelling culture in the world is something that requires a deep level of sensitivity. So what we offered was an opportunity to come through and share how we tell stories, and then kind of engage in a conversation around how do you tell stories. And then over the process of many years, we worked to help the kids create their own performance of a local dreaming story that they wrote, that they created, which included both English and their own First Nations language. It was a very long collaboration. I think it's fair to say horrendously resourced. We were very, very bare bones. We didn't have a lot to work with, but the outcome was beautiful.
Sounds incredible.
We had an opportunity. They made their own costumes. We ended up getting a dedicated artist who, I think we ran this thing on like $10,000 a year. It was absolutely bare bones. And that had to cover the travel to the area, the employment of the artist, had to cover everything. And we aimed, the goal was to kind of just help them feel comfortable with the idea of owning their own voice, owning storytelling. The goal of, like, from the teacher's perspective was, dealing with a lot of cultural shame and having the ability to have a voice where they could potentially get a job in the local tourism industry as somebody who is a tour guide, or they could potentially use the skills that we were teaching to actively, help get themselves a job. Because obviously one of the massive challenges in remote communities as well is employment, and how to keep people on country when industry is so kind of few and far between. So it was a really, really great program that we are continuing to try to explore ways of remounting. Unfortunately, that school itself closed as a result of COVID and some disruptions in the area. So we then had to kind of go and revisit a different school in Papunya, which is equally remote. And we took First Nations artists there to help engage with the kids. But it is a part of our program that we're deeply passionate about, but does lack the resourcing to kind of make it as kind of, I guess, the thing I really want is longevity. I'm really skeptical of things that turn up with the idea of doing something as opposed to kind of creating a conversation which has a longevity, because I think a conversation can last forever, whereas a program has a beginning and an end. But if you enter into a conversation, I feel like that's the way to. That's certainly the kind of company that I would like to lead.
Thank you.
Oh, Cindy, yes, thank you as well for that. Just a reminder that, of course, we also work outside of First Nations. We work with English as a second language as well. Cindy, did you want to talk about that? Or?
Sure. Yes. No, great. From my own experience, PIA had worked really greatly with their kids, and we had kids in year 7 and 8, and you would think they would not be interested in poetry in high school setting, high LeBoat, high ELD, but they were. I think they were more, in awe of the language coming out of the performers, the actors, the poets, and the teachers. Again, primary setting, just felt really inspired to teach poetry, because often the thing that they don't touch, right? Because if it's like it gets sidelined all the time, but if you mix it with drama, it's just so much more powerful. And we've extended it to visual arts as well in most cases, and it becomes this really rich experience for our learners. And yeah, their first language has always been welcome. PIA had always been really flexible, and they're not set in this is what's going to happen. They're really open to suggestions and taking into account the school context and the classroom. So it's great. It's been great.
Where possible, we have had opportunities to employ multilingual artists, which we employ, how and when we can. It's not something that we can always rely on, but whenever we have the skills to genuinely add to that conversation, we do.
Yeah, I think because we go into so many schools and so many communities that have students of such varied backgrounds, and Australia is wonderfully such a multicultural country, the English language really for us just becomes a vessel for us to communicate with everyone, to then share the idea that your voice matters in whatever way, whatever language, whatever way that you want to communicate that. And the poetry that we showcase in our shows, we've got some of the classical stuff to go, hey, this looks intimidating, this Shakespearean sonnet, but let's break it down, as well as international poetry, First Nations poetry from all sort of backgrounds, through the vessel of the English language, to be able to sort of meet the kids where they are, meet young people where they are, and hopefully inspire their voice through their own cultural lens, through their own lens of language.
It's probably not a bad thing to point out that when we very, very first started Poetry in Action, one of the very first things that I did to kind of hook kids in was that we started a show by reading Eminem in this really boring, monotone way, just kind of like the way that Liv did in her first kind of recitation of her poem. And I guess the point that we're trying to make to kids is that anything read boring is going to be boring. And so the idea of, I think the big thing is that kids resist taking risks on this kind of stuff. And so by putting ourselves out there first and taking that risk as artists, showing ourselves failing, showing ourselves making mistakes, showing ourselves, not succeeding, it gives them permission to do the same.
Yeah, something that I found, sorry to jump in, something that I found myself saying to a lot of young people when I was touring in the Q&A sessions was, it's cool to care, because it can be so intimidating to voice your opinion that you like something or you don't like something, you're passionate about something. And like Bryce was just saying, having the actors go forward also as young people and, being silly and caring about language and putting forward these big ideas, it really sort of, you start to see the shift in the young people in the audience where they go, oh, actually maybe I can put myself forward. Maybe it is cool to sort of like speak up and have a voice about something. That was, something that I think was a recurring theme.
And it's certainly something that I think that bears bears repeating that it's, you know, it's in virtually all of our shows that apathy isn't cool. Like, you know, like that it's that nothing happens if you're apathetic. One of the things that we do have a speeches show that covers, you know, kind of the modes of rhetoric: ethos, pathos, logos. Helps kids think critically, helps kids understand how language can be used to inspire, to put forward an idea. We look at great speeches. We look at young people, particularly, who change the world through speeches, where moments in time are, you know, crystallized because somebody has the right words. I think great speeches inherently are poetic. You know, we do remember phrases from speeches, you know, from the great orators of the past, because they are inherently wrapped up in a poetry that the kids can access, and kind of, you know, give a platform to them to kind of explore their own voice.
Yeah.
Well, I think that's probably a good place to pause, in a sense, because we're running out of time. But I think this has been a really inspiring session for all of us, you know, and I guess at the heart of what you're talking about is how important it is to nurture children and young people's confidence in being able to express their own voice, and to feel that they have a right to do that. And sadly, often, I think, certainly in my day, poems were sometimes done to death, you know, with, you know, one person's perspective or one person's view. And I think we have to be inspired by what Poetry in Action is doing. And the fact that you've reached so many, you're reaching your 1 millionth this year, is really exciting. So congratulations.
Thank you very much.
Thank you so much for joining us tonight.